Hi, this is Ben Lamborn doing question number 4 for the TEEM class for the Old Testament and Psalms class. And the question I'm answering is, 1, going to be relatively short, and 2, describe how your view of the Old Testament has changed as a result of your work in this class. The only right answer for this item is your answer. Possible questions for reflection. What is new? What is clearer? What do you affirm with more emphasis than before? Is it more Christian than before? Does it seem less old than before? So, one of the things to know about me is I am a liberationist. I think the church needs to be liberated from itself, and so that's going to come through in this answer to this question. And I think that the Old Testament carries a lot of liberating messages within it, especially within the Exodus story and the prophets. But I know we didn't go into the prophets. And I think the Psalms are a way that we express ourselves to God in all of the heartache, in all of the joyful times, and in coming back together. And so I would say I am a Jesus kind of a person, because I love Jesus's stories and Jesus's message. The Old Testament very much speaks to me as well. So I have never been blind to the Old Testament, and have found an incredible amount of richness in it throughout my life. And so I'm just going to answer the question from a really frank standpoint of the fact that I think the church needs to be liberated, and that the Old Testament may be speaking back to that liberation that the church needs to experience. So God is a God of liberation. God is a God of relationship. God is a God of love for creation. And God is a God who laments for their people who are not living in right relation with one another, with God and with creation. God is also a God who transforms. God is a God always in motion amongst the people. There are many stories that are threaded into the Old Testament that it is enlightening to follow the thread of the story of the sub-characters. Because while they may not be the heroes of the stories that we learned in Sunday school, their stories are important, and their weavings show us other outcomes of the stories and where the unexpected occurs. As I said, I'm someone who's always loved liberation theology, and the Exodus story is one of my favorites, and one that I reflect upon regularly when I think about a people in exile, as I believe the transgender and queer community have been forced out by the church, particularly in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and the 1980s. The narrative of being enslaved and having to cause a disturbance in the force in order to be released from slavery. Then being chased into the sea, followed by your oppressors. What a frightening image. Yet we often forget the terror of leaving home, because we know the story. The terror of leaving all that you know behind, even if it's slavery. What does it mean to leave that behind and carry only what you can carry on your backs with you as an entire community? Leaving that place that we know and trust in God's steadfast. So that frightening image. And we forget that terror of leaving home. Leaving that place we know, and to trust in God and God's steadfast love to provide for us. And that is the Exodus story. Can we trust in God? Does God have to show us how we are enslaved? have to show our oppressors outstanding miracles. This world is full of outstanding miracles every day. We are an unimpressed people. I think the miracles that we are shown today are the horrors that we see today happening around us. In the refugees being kicked out of their homes, in the violence upon Black people, upon the fact that the United States consumes most of the Earth's resources and leaves little for anybody else. Wouldn't those be the signs that God would want us to pay attention to? And to give up our privilege and our power and our comfort so that others may be liberated. And we are liberated in that process as well. And it is hard to let go of our fears. The Israelites, even though miracles have been performed, the Israelites doubt. They are provided for, but still they doubt and turn away from God, who is loving them and sustaining them in the wilderness. But the wilderness is uncomfortable. I find this analogy similar to the church's current place in history. The church is enslaved to itself, to its own false gods, to its fears of losing more people and escaping the trappings in which we have found comfort inside our buildings, inside of our pews, inside of our Bible studies, inside of our heritage, inside of our insulated buildings. The wilderness is uncomfortable, and what if God's people decided to let go of the trappings of the church and wander into the wilderness, trusting that God will provide? This is not an ancient story. This is our story today. The church is being asked to let go of its comfort zone and move into the wilderness and trust that God will provide. For we are the oppressors now. We are not the oppressed. Can we let go? Can we be like Pharaoh, the Egyptian, and let go of those whom we enslave and become liberated ourselves? That is the sub-story that I'd like to follow. How is Egypt liberated? By the leaving of the Israelites. So is this an old story? Or is this a new story that we are brought into again and again? So, what is new? What is clear? What's clear is that there are subthreads and that we continue to identify ourselves with the Israelites being liberated. We're not the Israelites anymore. And what do you affirm with more emphasis than before? I affirm with more emphasis that we need to follow the other stories and examine ourselves. And maybe not from a Christian viewpoint. That we are freed by grace. I love that term, that we are freed by grace. But just because we're freed by grace does not give us the right to oppress. And does it seem less old than before? Yes. It's not the Old Testament. This is our current testament. This is where we're at today. We do not have a Jesus leading us, helping us form communities, tearing down empire. Every time those communities get formed, they get torn down by the oppressor, by empire. And so do I think the Old Testament is old? I think the Old Testament is what we're living today. class. I enjoyed it, and